Great pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Mixael to Ilia State University. Many of you know, I would still say that Professor Კვάντε is one of the most versatile, interesting and influential European philosophers of the new generation. His books on Hegel, on bioethics, on Marx have become an unavoidable reference, although there have been, some of them have been quite recently published. Just I will say a couple of words about his life and work. He studied at the universities, the Free University of Berlin and at the University of Münster. He wrote his dissertation in 1992 about Hegel's concept of action, and he wrote his habilitation in 2001 about the human life, about the personal life and human death. Both were published, of course, and they have become very important references in their respective fields. After that, he was professor at the Duisburg-Essen University and at the University of Köln, before in 2009 becoming a professor of practical philosophy at the University of Münster, where he's also a principal investigator of the excellence cluster Religion and Politics. And quite recently has become vice rector of the University of Münster for the international relations. Among his works, I would like to mention his already classic book, monograph on the actuality of mind, which is an extremely important study of Hegel, published in 2011. A collective monograph on enabling social Europe, as well as his many works on bioethics and biomedical ethics. Today he has chosen a very topical and very relevant issue, the issue of religion in the public sphere, which is provocatively titled as the banning religion, with a question mark. Of course, we know that it was quite a surprise when the religion made a comeback in the last decades all over the world. And for us in Georgia, this has been a surprise which we not always handled very well. After the fall of the Soviet Union, we're confronted with the surge of religiosity, and we still are struggling to have a conceptuality addressing the issue. And it's a great pleasure that Professor Კვάντε will share his approach and his experience with us. And after his lecture, you will have the opportunity to ask him questions, and I hope that you will use this opportunity. So it's with great pleasure that I'm giving floor now to Professor Კვάντε.
Well, magnificent colleagues and students, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be here today to have the chance to present these arguments. This is really work in progress in at least two senses. First, I'm still thinking about it myself, what the right answer to religious attitudes, to the role of religious beliefs in modern society might be. And so I think, on the other hand, as is already mentioned, in most of our pluralistic societies, how to deal with religion is not only a private affair, but also a public affair. And this paper work done on this work, especially in the US American literature and political philosophy, and there liberals say that in a modern pluralistic society, religious arguments are not allowed to be part of public political debate. Due to a thesis I'll mention shortly, the neutrality of the modern pluralistic state. What we all see is that political discourse is back in political debates of different kinds, on different levels, it is in some parts of the world even back in the heart of political institutions, even in the foundations of law. Some are again fighting for understanding the state, deeply committed to a religious worldview. And so we are facing a problem which, ironically, has been debated in a period in German philosophy I'm also doing my research on, the left Hegelian movement directly after Hegel's death, and the young Marx and Feuerbach, for example. And so in this area of religion and politics, in the excellence cluster I'm a member of, I could combine my systematic interests and my interest in the history of philosophy in a very intricate way. Today, I don't want to refer to the classical positions. This will be done on Monday in the afternoon, where I discuss with those of you who want to share it the arguments of Marx and others concerning the Prussian state and the theological justification of political power and so on. What I want to do today is follow the question, should we, and if, why should we ban religious arguments from the political sphere? Or the other side, some version of pluralistic philosophers say, shouldn't we make any distinction between a religious argument and any other kind of arguments, whatever they are? Isn't there a distinction between a scientifically based belief and a religious belief? This is the other extreme position. This is one version of anything is equal and anything goes debate. Somewhere in between I will try to steer along. I will use some examples from my political background, which I think has some similarities, but for sure is different since Germany is in a different political and economic situation. But as we learned last year when we met, our universities also do face problems dealing with these issues in Münster and here, which are similar and which myself think are very good reasons to cooperate on that, learning from each other how to deal with these issues. So, where do I start? Maybe since later we can discuss these things, and some of these things can go to the heart of each of you personally. If it comes to religious beliefs, it's very easy to be very deeply committed and very easily to be hurt by arguments and counter-arguments. And one thing here is start to be honest to yourself. And the thing is, do you really think holding religious attitudes and beliefs is a real option? Or is your main position that's all rubbish and nonsense anyway, only ideology? I don't want to say what the right position concerning this question is, but you have to know where you start, personally and politically. And this is where I start. And starting here is not to say that's a neutral way to start, but to say that's my way to start, because I have learned in German debates in bioethics and biopolitics that a lot of people don't start here. They don't share all of these premises. And my first premise is we live in an age of history, at least in Europe, or let me say in Western Germany, where we have a secular state. Secular state means two things. Firstly, we have a plurality of worldviews, not one single religion, and a lot of, in no sense, religious or theologically based at all. This is a de facto empirical claim. It would be wrong to say that we are, in Western Germany, still are a Catholic nation. We aren't anymore. And the normative thing is we shouldn't be anymore. And this is the second. I take a pluralist stance. I mean, in two senses. Firstly, we have a plurality in a lot of issues. I'm not a relativist. I don't think that it's relatively dependent on yourself or on culture alone whether you think that crimes against humanity are ethically right or wrong, or whether a war is justified or not. There is not everything possibly justified in ethics, but there is a lot of space for opinions and disagreements. And this, I mean, is factually the case. In a lot of issues in our societies, we have disagreements. And this will be, as I'll show in the context of biopolitics, some of these most personal and most ethically contested debates, which at least in Germany we have discussed for many years in bioethics and biopolitics. Pluralistic can also mean a much stronger thesis. The first thesis was we have it as an empirical claim, we do have such a pluralistic society. It's a sociological thesis. In the end, if you want to debate that, we have to address the data and we have to ask who is committed to which kind of beliefs. Not a philosophical issue at all. The other reading is I'm defending pluralism. I think pluralism is ethically valuable, intrinsically ethically valuable. Both words are relevant. Firstly, valuable. It means it is nothing I think we should overcome in a better society. My view of a good society isn't that pluralism is overcome and everybody is sharing one and the same normative vision. I think having a plurality of normative orders and visions is a positive gain. One reason for this is why I think it's necessary if you want to lead an individual life, realize personal autonomy, having a biographical way, your own way through life, you need this option that you are different ways and not a homogeneous one right order way. Saying this is sometimes a conflict between generations. The idea of plurality and different life forms and different conceptions of a good life and biographies, that there are a lot of ways of living, gets more and more attractive for the younger ones. And the older generation is not used to it, and getting older sometimes is the process of having fixed forms attractive, not to orient yourself again and anymore. So there is some intergenerational interesting thing going on here. But I think the best society I can imagine is one in which a plurality of life forms, of orientations, of ideals, within some limits, is institutionally offered to the people living there. And I think it's intrinsically valuable. In some ethics, autonomy or plurality is only accepted as an instrument for something else, which is the real ethical aim. For example, if you are a kind of utilitarian thinker who thinks that well-being for the people is the main thing, you can say allowing them to lead their lives on their own is the best way to reduce conflicts, so well-being is realized. But if we could find another way, overcoming plurality without having too much costs, we would go that way, because plurality is making things more complex. And we do it because reducing this complexity causes trouble, and the trouble is a kind of negative burden. I don't think that this is the real good argument to accept that there is plurality, because it is if it would be able to overcome it, I would like to overcome it. I think it's an intrinsic value. A world which is pluralistically designed is ethically spoken a better world than a world in which you have a non-pluralistic design, even if a maximum of happiness could be realized in that. So this is the basic where I stand. And I will use examples in a field in which I'm an expert in some sense. As you heard, it is bioethical debates. And the reason is, even if you have a kind of secularized society in which most people say, I'm not a religious person, right? If it comes to birth and death, to illness and crisis, even those who think they are not religious do hold beliefs which are very close to something I would qualify as religious attitudes. The same in the ecological movement. If it comes to nature as such, people who are staunch atheists talk about nature as if it were a subject and a god or something like that. So there is some interesting thing going on there. And the other thing is, even in the most liberal societies, if it comes to dealing with human life and killing human life, liberalism comes to an end and a different kind of arguments enters the scene. We have in Germany a lot of liberal political and legal orders. If you look to the biopolitical regulations, it's totally different. As I sometimes say, and that's a fact, in terms of the legal and ethical rules concerning bioethical issues, Germany is closer to Turkey than to Great Britain. So Europe is not ordered in the lines you think it is ordered. The Netherlands, Belgium, and Great Britain, you have really liberal rulings for dealing with embryo experimentation, etc. You don't have it in France, you don't have it in Germany, you don't have it in Italy, and you don't have it in more countries you think they are very conservative. If you take different issues, freedom of reproduction, abortion, the field changes. So there is not a clear-cut ordering of attitudes in this field. And this is, for a philosopher, a puzzling thing. And if you have a debate between left-wing, right-wing, liberals, conservatives on assisted suicide, you find defenders of liberal and non-liberal positions across all the political positions. It's cut crossing the normal political orientation. So something deeper is going on. And this is why I think this kind of examples can illustrate how much everybody here in the room and how much we all in our societies still are in the grip of 2,000 years of being religiously formed in our culture, in our biographies, etc. Okay. My aims are very simply stated, and they are not theoretical. They are practical. There's a fierce debate. In some countries, pro-abortionists are killed by anti-abortionists and other way around. Nurses are shot down before when they go into the hospital where they are doing abortions in the United States. People are sent away from universities if they do hold the wrong positions. Something we thought it's overcome in liberal societies, but it's still the case, and even more and more the case in the United States, and not only since Trump is ruling there, but for more than 10, 15 years concerning the question, should we teach our children in schools and universities evolutionary theory or not? Some say we shouldn't do that because that's not neutral, but against the Bible. So they say we have to teach creationism, something like that. Or we have to teach both things. Since religious, theological explanations of the world and scientific are on equal worth, you cannot make arguments for or against one side, and this means you cannot give scientific knowledge in school if this scientific knowledge is incompatible with deeply entrenched religious attitudes people do hold. This is a kind of cultural fight in the United States, for example. And this explains why in this country the debate banning religion from the political sphere has become such powerful argument. But in Germany these days, you know, we will have an election next week, and there are parties who say that the mentioning of God in the German constitutional law should be dropped out because it's not neutral. And some think it's a good idea to do, and others think it's not. Right? And I want to say we have to clarify the debate. This is what philosophers can do, sorting things out. You have to learn some vocabulary, you get some instruments to sort things out, and you can better understand your own position in that debate. I don't want to tell you what the right position is, but I want to bring you in a position that you can say, well, when I'm angry with someone attacking religious attitudes or defending religious attitudes, and I give a counter-argument, I have the following in mind. And there are a lot of things you can have in mind. And I think if you yourself don't know what you have in mind, nobody else will understand, and rational debate is impossible. being clear what you want to say and what's the basis for justifying it is the precondition of rational debate or rational dissensus. And this is a precondition for democratic living together. So in the end, I will give a sketch how to overcome this dialectical stalemate. I mean by that word incompatible positions which in themselves are plausible, and there is no neutral argument to tip the balance towards one or the other. You have a situation in which every argument against position A uses a premise of position B, or the other way around. So there's no neutral ground. Normally we say, well, I'm the neutral philosopher, there's the one party, there's the other one, I clarify the debate, and I say this is a better argument. In a dialectical stalemate, you have not a neutral standpoint to have an overview of the conflicting parties. Every argument is within the debate. And these are the most problematic political debates and ethical debates. And in the end, I have a very, very short list of tentative conclusions which are open to debate. This is the way I will proceed. I give a short sketch, and then I will clarify what critique means. There is more than one sense of what critique means. And the main version of critique, if it comes to religious attitudes, is external negative critique. I will explain what it is. And then I will ask something, and this is what is the philosophy of religion part of what I've offered you today, is what is the difference between a religious attitude and a non-religious attitude? Is there something as a clear difference? Have in mind, the idea here is, the question is, should we ban religious arguments from political discourse? Right? The presupposition of asking this question is that you can clearly say that this argument is a religious one and that one is not. If there is no difference, the question dissolves. And then I will distinguish some kind of arguments you can use to sorting things out and to show which kind of justifications have to be given for which kinds of positions. And I will say what I think is a good idea to go on. So, what are religious arguments? If you ask this and have in mind what my position in an ongoing fierce political debate is. I'm not starting here as a classroom philosopher. We have a politically ongoing debate, right? And the debate is such that I have said, I want to have a secular, pluralistic society. And I've said, people say in a liberal state, religious arguments have to be banned from the discourse. This means a politician, for example, can have religious beliefs and attitudes, but if he is talking in the parliament and if he is justifying laws, he has to refrain using that. He's not allowed to say what he really believes. This is what it means. He has to give another kind of description of what his position is. This means, for example, in the Deutscher Bundestag, if we are passing a law on physician-assisted suicide, and there is a member of the Bundestag who is holding Christian beliefs, and he is against physician-assisted suicide, he has to give a justification for his position without using religious vocabulary, which in the end is what he really believes. That is what the liberals want to realize, right? And I say, well, if this is the liberal, neutral, modern, leftist, secular position, the Enlightenment position, something I would fight for, what is the precondition to have it this way? Well, the first is, you have to tell me which argument is a religious one and which one is not. If you cannot make this distinction, the whole debate is muddled, right? And if you start as a philosopher and ask yourself, what makes an argument a religious argument? I think nearly everybody here in the room will have debates with his friends or parents or children concerning lifestyle, ethical issues, deep values, right? And then you get something like an argument and you say, this conservative argument of my dad, it's only a kind of consequence of his deep conservative religious attitudes towards sexuality or something like that, right? And you say, hey, why do you think it was a religious argument? If you say, no, I never thought that way, okay, I have to say something else. If you logical debates concerning using nuclear power, energy, wasting water, etc., some say we have to respect nature. Right? This is a notion of nature which is not of sciences. In science, nature is only a kind of object. If you want to say we have to respect nature, you make nature a kind of either a subject itself or something which has a kind of teleological structure in it because it is created by someone. The theological description is you have to protect nature because it has been created by God and you are the guardian of it. In this way, a lot of ecological arguments can be rephrased, and these arguments are held by a lot of people who think themselves they don't have a religious attitude towards the world and towards themselves. If it comes to the debate whether we should do research with human embryonic stem cells and kill embryos for doing this, some say we shouldn't play God here. Right? What's that? Is it a religious argument? I have heard it from atheists. They say we shouldn't play God. What do you mean by that? It's a metaphor or is it something more? So the first thing we should clarify is, what do we mean by religious? There's a very narrow, very, very narrow reading of being religious. This means a religious argument is such in which specifically framed vocabulary we have from theology and the church is used. God, angels, something like that, right? In a very broad sense, religious means every evaluative stance towards the world in which the world is understood as intrinsically evaluable, as having a sense and a meaning in itself, as a kind of nature, as a book, for example. Okay? It's a very broad thing. If somebody met the Dalai Lama, for example, or listened to him, he has a kind of everyday version of religion. What the normal, ordinary people ethically think is religious. It's a basic ethical orientation towards the world. Don't hurt others. This is religious, he says. It's the other kind of spectrum, right? And if you say some arguments shouldn't be used in the classroom in school, which ones? This don't play God argument or you shouldn't treat a dog like a stone argument? Where's the difference? Not a clear issue, and philosophers have to do a lot of work here. And the next thing is, this is even more problematic if you are in a university. There's a strong distinction between a religious and a theological belief. Theology is the theory of religious attitude. Religious attitudes can be very non-theoretical, basic stances human beings hold towards the world, towards each other, and towards themselves. Something like, I shouldn't do that, and life is wonderful, or something is unjust, what's happening here doesn't make sense, right? If you say the earthquake didn't make sense, it can really mean, if you're a scientist, say, well, nothing in nature makes sense. Or you can say it's something like a sin, a disaster, right? In culture, we had this earthquake of Lisbon destroying one of the flourishing cities in the 16th century, or I think it was 15 something else. And Kleist, 200 years later, wrote a short piece on it and showed that if you are really a secular one, you cannot say that there is a tragedy going on. Because earthquakes don't cause at will. They are simply ongoing processes. But normally we interpret typhoons, earthquakes, as if there is a book in which things make sense and these things don't make any sense at all. And this is a very basic religious attitude. If someone is getting an illness, you look for the one who is guilty. You ask yourself, what have I done that I get it? This is the punishment for a sin interpretation. A scientist will say there are causes but no responsibilities here, right? But we understand ourselves in this old way. We ask, why me? Why my wife? Why my daughter? What happened here, right? In a scientific world where you can ask for causes, not for meanings. And if you say only theological arguments are banned, that would mean the functionary ideology of the churches should be banned, but even not the priests. They could be there because they are part of both. They are in the daily affair dealing with the people, and they are theorists called theology. Should someone who is member of the highest judge be a theological person? Could someone, as a trained theologian, be prime minister and using his science to rule the country? What do you think? Maybe you will have a problem, right? If he is studied economics or has wrote famous poems, or so, you say, great, intellectual power and for president. If it is someone like that, you say, well, it's trouble in a modern state, right? So, how to distinguish religion and theological? You can be a fierce critique of theology as a kind of pseudoscience without criticizing religion. Now, some would, I say, there is some point in the sentence that theology is a threat to religion. If you hold that religion is a basic emotional attitude, making a theory of it, causing trouble for the feeling itself. Okay, this we should clarify before we even start asking the question whether we should ban it. Do we really think we should ban theology from political discourse or the churches? Or do we really want to ban all these basically religious metaphors and pictures we all use? That would be a very complicated thing. Because in the end, what would be left there? Only scientific discourse? Technical discourse? If you ban all these other meaningful metaphors, that would be a very thin way to deal with politics. It would be a kind of expertocratic, technical debate only if you reduce everything of meaning there. Well, why biopolitics? By biopolitics, I mean political regulations of issues dealing with human embodiness, life and death. A lot of examples you all know. Abortion is one thing. Experiments on human embryos is another one. Euthanasia, assisted suicide is one. Surrogate mothership is another thing. Reproductive medicine is an example. And in all these cases, we have laws dealing with these issues. The medical realm, there are a lot of laws ruling this area, and this is meant by biopolitics. But in this, we try to use science and law and ethics to deal with our being vulnerable human beings. And there are all these intuitions which stem from a very old worldview we all had in our history, come back. Nietzsche once said that we have dropped the horizon. I think in a secular society like Germany, we dropped it nearly everywhere, but not if it comes to our being organisms in the world. If we understand ourselves as needy, vulnerable organisms, we fall back into a very old religious idea of understanding natural processes. Nearly nobody can accept a purely scientific description of his own being an organism. Illnesses are interpreted not only as causal things, they are interpreted as having meaning or making sense or not making sense, something like that. It's very natural to do it this way. So I think if you want to understand how far a society is secularized, look at their biopolitical debates. There you will find a lot of these old arguments and metaphors in use, even by people who don't use it in other contexts. Here they use it again. A very easy thing is people don't go to the church. If someone dies or someone is severely ill or a child is born, they go there. There are crisis situations in which the churches get back into biographies in which they haven't had any role to play for many decades. You see? And ask yourself in your social field, in which part can you imagine or have you seen someone being back in a religious interpretation of life, although he never has been in that business before? And these are these situations we are dealing with in biopolitics. So this is why I think it's an interesting field. It's very problematic to deal with it anyway in our societies. But for my question as a philosopher of religion, what I'm playing here today is, it's a very interesting diagnostic field, how far we accept a purely scientific description of our being in the world. And there are limits to the way we do it. For those of you who have the experience, they try to have a purely scientific description of falling in love. And you will see the amazing thing of being in love is somehow vanishing. And the meaning of being a human being can be dissolved by a purely scientific description of it. And in these situations, in critical life situations, the other resources in which we give meaning to what's happening come back. Right? And this is why there is so many fierce debate in these old metaphors here. So if you want to have a critique of religious attitudes, and we want to criticize them, if we say we should ban them. Banning something is one of the most strictest forms of criticism. You know, it's like in soccer when you give someone the red card. This is the most fierce criticism of his way of playing the game. Quit, right? The first is, what is the aim of critique? In daily discourse, at least in Germany, if a professor criticizes a student's paperwork, it means he points out all the negative things, right? Well, from the ordinary meaning, critique can also highlighting all the good things. There is positive critique, saying this is a strength of it. There is negative critique, this is the weaknesses of it. And then is something, in the English I have to use the word demarcating. The German word is, I think, more telling. It is grenzziehend. This means drawing a line. And this means ask yourself what can be done with it and what cannot be done with it, right? Basically, Kant had this idea of doing philosophy, getting clear what can be done with something and what is beyond what it can do. And you can ask yourself, if I criticize religious attitudes, do I want to have a positive thing? Do I want to say what's the strength of this kind of attitude or a negative one? Or do I want to ask what is the distinction between this kind of attitudes towards all the rest and why are they special? And if you criticize, and this you can use in all scientific disciplines, so this is the part for all of you who are not interested in religion or philosophy, you need standards. If you want to criticize something, you need standards. There are formal standards. You learn in logic, coherence, consistency, clearness, well justified in methods and so on, right? This is a formal criteria. Sometimes I could criticize the paper of a student in the negative sense without saying anything about the argument, just telling this is a logical fault, there is a sentence not grammatical, you use a term in the wrong way, all formal criteria. Yeah? Internal critique, and this is important, if you start discussing with a person having a different opinion from yours, and you really want to improve the position of the other party, you should bring arguments and objections to her which are relevant for her view from her perspective. Okay? If you say, well, you have claimed A, B, C, and D. I have an argument to say that A and B together can't be combined with C. This is really a problem for my opponent because he has accepted A, B, C, and D. Right? This is internal critique. This is the strongest form of critique because you play with the cards of your opponent and you show that something is defective in his position, so he has to do the homework there. For example, if I say to a liberal who wants to say banning religion, I say, well, give me a definition of what you mean by religious. And he gives me an inconsistent or unclear definition of this central phrase. I can say, I don't understand your claim. And you cannot explain because you don't know what you mean by the word. Go back, make it clear, come back. If you have a non-clear demand in a political debate, nobody can understand it. And you can be successful, but it's not rational what is happening, right? This is the difference between philosophical discourse and political discourse. Very often, unclear aims and concepts are very effective in mobilizing people from a rational point of view. If the concepts are not clear, nothing is gained in the end. And then there is external critique. This is the easiest thing. There is someone holding the thesis A and B, and he has a conclusion C, and you are against C, and you say, I start from non-A. I simply don't accept your premise, right? If this happens, you shouldn't discuss C anymore because the real disagreement is between A and non-A. And discussing at C is only shying away from the real disagreement you have, right? You can discuss whether you want to do research with severely demented human beings in the old age, right? And then you can start quarreling whether you can do it in this or that technical way. Mostly, people disagree whether they are persons in a full-fledged sense or not, and that's a really crucial issue. But they don't discuss that. They bypass the crucial issue by going to some technical details, discussing things which are not really at issue because nobody wants to really openly say no. We have a debate on refugees in Germany. Yes? And I think a lot of people don't think that a refugee has the same right to a good life than a German. But nobody tells you that. They tell you on a different level that there is something, we are not rich enough for that, or there are these debates. And they are not open to really identify the points of disagreement. Do all human beings have a basic right? Or is being born in a national state somewhere per accident making fierce ethical differences? This is the issue there. But I didn't want to deal with that problem we have in Europe. But it's the same way, right? Try to find out where the real disagreements are. Now, if it comes to critique of religion, the most dominant form we find is negative and external. People who criticize religious attitudes have the basic attitude, religious attitudes are bad, irrational, fanatic, conservative, paternalistic. Okay, I don't have to, someone may have different vocabulary also. And mostly it's external. It uses premises a religious person cannot accept. For example, there is no God, science tells us what there is and nobody else will do, right? And if you criticize a religious person or a religious argument from that position, you cannot even start a debate because you should start one step before and ask, why do you really think that science tells us what there really is? do you really think that only science gives us good arguments? What is with historians, with philosophers, and so on? Mathematics is not science, right? Why is a religious argument worse than a scientific one? Maybe there is a good argument, but give me one. Why you think scientifically produced beliefs are more solid, are better than other beliefs? It's not a trivial thing. And the most forms in political debate are, without even being very clear, framed from this religious and theological, it's all nonsense, and politically it's conservative. Don't listen to them. They don't just have, they want to bring through their power. They want to be paternalistic. You don't take them seriously. And you have to ask yourself when you debate with a person whether you in principle are willing to listen to its argument or whether you directly think it's all rubbish. It makes a difference in dealing in political and daily discourse whether you can imagine that the other person might be the right and you are the wrong or not. And if you don't think that a religious argument might be the right one, you should be clear about that, because now you can only phrase negative external critique. And this is something a religious person simply cannot accept. There is no middle ground to discuss anymore, right? That's the problem. And if you have a political debate in which you think there is no middle ground for compromise, it's a very different debate from where you think we need to find compromises. A non-compromising political debate is totally different from one, as we know, as a normal democratic thing, finding compromises in complicated situations. And it's not easy in really this question to see what the right stance really is. And then you can criticize religion in two directions. The one is what I call theoretical critique. I will give you an example there. The next one is practical. And it's not clear very often if people criticize religion what they have in mind. Let me explain. Theoretical has three levels. If I criticize religious attitudes in the theoretical, I accept something the religious person also accepts, that it's belief. It is theoretical belief, not faith. If someone, and I mentioned this debate between creationists and evolutionists in USA, if someone really thinks that God created the world in 7 days, as the Bible says, in the terms of belief, it would be wrong if God had taken 8 days, right? Or if evolution is right, something like that. And if you criticize religious attitudes in the theoretical stance, you understand a religious attitude as forming beliefs which can be argued for. You think they are theoretical beliefs, right? And this, in philosophy of religion, is one of the crucial points. Maybe it's a totally misunderstanding to think that religious attitudes are theoretical beliefs at all. Probably they are something very, very different. I will come back to that. But if you criticize a person holding that God created the world by evolutionary theory has shown that, you presuppose that there is a kind of cognitive enterprise going on, and the question is who has a better theory to explain that the world exists. A lot of debates go that way. Well, the strategies. If you have this starting point, you presume that you are quarreling about facts, right? Basically, someone says there is butter in the refrigerator and the other says there is no butter in the refrigerator anymore. Well, open it and look at it, right? But if you criticize the religious theory that there is butter in the refrigerator, You can either say, you think you know that there is something, but you haven't looked into the refrigerator for weeks and you didn't do the shopping for months. It's always I'm doing it. You hope there is something to eat in the refrigerator. It's a practical attitude. You think you know, but you don't know anything. This is, I criticize my opponent by saying you think you are arguing and you think you are a cognitivist and you have arguments, but basically it's only wishful thinking. This is the first strategy. You cannot accept that death is the end, and therefore you believe that there is a life after death. And you think there are arguments for it. But it's only hope dressed in argument, nothing else. It's wishful thinking. This is one strategy. Probably someone has thought about thinking about life after death in this wishful thinking way, right? Second is, well, it's like this. You think God created the world, I think it was Big Bang, right? This is the alternative we have today. Two material claims, and you commit yourself to the one and the other one to the other. From a philosopher's perspective, Big Bang is nearly as mysterious as God, really, to look at that, right? But you do it this way. Some say there are 7 death sins, other religious systems or theologians say there are 14, and they start a 30-year war to clarify the issue. And in the end, it were 8. Well, so it's a material claim, right? Then there is the idea, okay, you say there was a wonder in history, or Jesus Christ was going to heaven. But you don't have any evidence for that. Where is the picture? Where is the Google map view? Where is the YouTube video for it? Nothing. So you don't have evidence. Okay? And this is another way of argument, the way it goes. For example, a scientist says, and you know the main scientist, who was the first human being in space? It was a Russian. I think it was Gagarin. What was his first sentence when he was there? I cannot see a God. And that's this. We learn in school that God is beyond the sky. He's an official atheist going there, making an empirical discovery, saying, falsified. Right? That was a propaganda trick. And he really said that, I think. No God here. Okay? Well. Or the final trick, and this is the most interesting one, because it seems to be so liberal. You say, yeah, well, you phrase your opinion in a religious talk. I can reduce it to something else. What you mean by miracle is mass hysteria. What you mean by creation is evolution and so on, right? What you mean by recovering from death is coming back from unconscious periods in times where people don't have theory about this or something like that. You translate or you reduce what the religious purpose say into different rational language. And philosophers are very happy to translate it into something they call liberal modern morality. Now you have God talk and you translate it into dignity talk, and now it seems to be secular. Try to define the notion of human dignity without using the notion of God, and you will face problems. And you know human dignity is the basic normative principle of the German society. And some think it's a notion coming from theology, others think it's a secular notion. It's not clear. And then there's a third version of the theoretical. It's a red herring, it's a mixed version. You can say a reinterpretation. And this means, well, I cannot perfectly translate what you mean in my language, but I can give a reinterpretation of your story which gives you the main things without giving you everything. Basically, you say, I leave the irrational part out and give you the rational kernel of it. Normally, if religious people read the result of such reinterpretation, they say, what I really wanted to say is lost. There has to be something more. And this more cannot be translated into rational discourse. This is where it ends. Habermas did it that way. We try to give a rational reinterpretation of religious discourse, which makes it suitable for secular, modern moral discourse. Okay, now to the practical, it's very quick. Some say religious attitudes make you ill. They are psychologically dysfunctional. They are repressional. Sigmund Freud had that theory up to today. They say people who are holding religious self-interpretations are somehow having unhealthy self-pictures which don't allow them to have an autonomous, self-fulfilling life. It means having a religious self-understanding is a way of oppressing yourself. And the other thing is to say it's ethically inadequate to hold religious beliefs. Why? On the level of the individual life, you define an authority which is beyond your own life, and you gain all you need. You are excused all the time because there is a God in the background who is doing all the things, and you are not responsible in the end. This is, in the individual life, you don't accept that you are autonomous. I think Camus was someone attacking this point, to say, if you go into metaphysics or in religious, you shy away from your freedom. You don't want to take the burden of being free. And ethically, as Sartre say, accept that you are free and nobody else is in charge for your life than you yourself. This is the modern pluralistic autonomous idea of leading your life. And there is a lot of ethical existentialist critique of religion going that way. And on the level of society, you have it religious framing or theological framing on the level of society is ethically inadequate because it is paternalistic, anti-pluralistic, and it doesn't allow people to lead an autonomous life if it is in opposition to religious beliefs. You know, in every religion you have a politics of dealing with people who are not believers, who have different religious orders. There is a lot of problems with something like that. And people say, we want to have a society in which religion, because its ideology, it's paternalistic, it's anti-pluralistic, is not acceptable, because normatively we want to have a secular pluralistic society, because this is a free society respecting autonomous people. Religious societies are not respecting autonomous individuals. And if you look around, there are some bad examples that this is not a very wrong diagnosis. If you have a regime in which fixed ideology is taken for everybody, individual freedom is threatened. But it's not only religious, you can also take other ideologies. If you take communism or the free market or religious, if it is the only ruling thing, it is putting pressure on societies. Now, is there a specific difference between religion and non-religion? First of all, do we need it? Do we need such a clear distinction? Well, one philosopher loves this idea. You have two blocks and you can put everything either in the one or the other one. Clear distinctions, right? Makes things easier. Everybody is either a friend or an enemy. Nothing else, nothing in between, right? Some bad films are that way. You directly know whether it's a good guy or a bad guy. No compromises. Do we really need it? Well, if we want to ban religious arguments completely, we have to have a clear definition. It's true. Others say we need a clear definition. Why? Every society needs religious beliefs to give a foundation to normative orders. Without religious beliefs, human societies cannot be good societies. This is the other way around. Both say we need a clear understanding in which moment a belief, an argument is a religious one. I don't think we need a clear distinction. I think we need clear criteria on the extremes, but not on this middle ground. This is a very different picture. If you are looking for a specific difference, I have a candidate. This is what I call existential commitments. What do I mean by existential commitments? It's something William James and Ludwig Wittgenstein brought into philosophy of religion. An existential commitment is an attitude you commit yourself to in leading your life along it. It's not a theoretical stance. You can believe that using too much water is an ecologically bad thing and shower 2 times a day. It's a mere theoretical attitude. A practical existential commitment is such that you lead your life based on the presupposition that it's true. You invest it as a guiding principle. And the feature is existential commitments are such that you cannot think to have different ones. Most of you can, some of you will have an opinion on the belief, is there intelligent life on other planets or not? Okay? Some will say, I don't know. Some will say yes. Some will say no. I think most of you can say, I will be the same person if I change my mind on that. Now most of you have a clear belief whether they are male or female. And some of you can imagine that they will be the same person even if they switch. Most of us won't. An existential commitment is such that it's so deeply involved in your personality, in your self-understanding, yet you cannot even reasonably understand what it would mean for you to believe otherwise. Yeah? It's such a deep way of orienting your life that even starting to think about, could I see things differently myself, doesn't make sense, because you say, I'm not the one I was before anymore. This is a conversion, which is described very often. Saulus Paulus in the biblical story, for example. And I think some practical attitudes we need are of this existential commitment kind. We are practically binding ourselves towards these orientations. And this is very special, a difference from mere theoretical beliefs. But not only religious beliefs do have this. Basic ethical values and commitments can also have this role. Even aesthetic values can be this way. Nietzsche was someone who said the aesthetic one defines who is a genius and who is me, not the ethical ones. So this means there is a decisive feature, but it's not specific for religious attitudes. You have it in your basic orientation if it comes to ethical orientation, for example, also. There is no clear-cut distinction between secular ethics and religious orientation, I think. The problem from this is, if you want to live in a pluralistic society, you need tolerance. Tolerance is not relativism, because tolerance means that you accept that people think otherwise than you, although you commit yourself to your position. You allow others to do and think otherwise. Right? You have your lifestyle and you know people do different, and you accept it although you wouldn't do it yourself, and maybe you even think it's morally wrong what they do, you accept it in some way. This is the outer tolerance. This means you tolerate that others have a different opinion, and this you need for pluralism. You vote for liberating abortion and others say it's a sin. Both know that the other really are committed to their position, and both accept that you can see it both ways. Outer tolerance. Inner tolerance is that you say yourself, I could see things ethically different than I do now. And I think there are a lot of ethical opinions and political opinions. You can say, I'm committed to this, but maybe I get some arguments and I change my mind. Concerning existential commitments, you don't have inner tolerance. There is no distinction between you and that attitude. You cannot make a difference there. And if they are contested, you have no argument anymore. And this is why they are so open to being fanatized. It's like you are touched on your identity. And you don't have argument for your way anymore, and you cannot even imagine to do otherwise. And then you have irrational identification, and on both sides there is no argument, no conceptual room for dealing and finding compromise anymore. And this is something Kant knew and Fichte knew and Hegel knew, that religious attitudes have an irrational aspect which makes it very difficult to deal with them in a pluralistic world. And this is why liberals want to ban them from the debate, because they are very useful to be fanatized. We see that. If you want to have a fanatic political conflict, put religion into it and it will work. That's easy. But if this is right, this explains why it is. And now the kind of the arguments, this is very easy. If you say banning religion, you can say, I want to ban any religion arguments, whatever they are, right? If you want to go that way, you have to tell me what a religious argument is and what not. Or you can say, I want to rescue them by giving them a secular translation, meaning you have a religious politician who is in the parliament justifying his position by not using his real position, but using a kind of quasi-secular translation of it. I don't think this is very helpful for democracies, because it's Orwellian speech, right? They don't say what they really think. Basically not a good idea. The other way is to say, maybe things can be more or less religious, more or less strong committed to specifically religious positions. Some are based only on religious attitudes, others are based on religious attitudes in combination with other things. Some are used to make categorical no's. Every human life is created in the face of God. No human life should be killed anywhere. No abortion, no war, right? This is a very strict argument. And maybe if you don't have any other argument for such a radical no-kill policy, you should say this is not a good way, because if you are not a religious person, you cannot accept that. And so we have to find something else. And most regulations in terms of abortion rulings don't use religious arguments. They use the autonomy of the pregnant woman and other aspects in combination. And they give you religious leeway, but they don't make religious the only argument. And this is a kind of compromising thing. It's somehow like you have a very dangerous aspect, this existential commitments, and you put them in a wider field of practical attitudes to make them milder a little bit and to find ways for compromising. And you can say, I go into the default and challenge mood, I accept them, but then I prove them. Default highs, you can use it, but then you have to give reasons for it. And if there are no plausible reasons, a non-believer can also find plausible, we put it away. It has to be open to rational, secular debates. This is what we have to say to the religious person. Describe your position such that a non-religious person at least can understand what you are after, how it works. Not full translation, but a kind of transparency. If there is no possibility to do that, they cannot be open in rational discourse, because they are somehow irrational positions only, dogmas, as we say. But we can do that on a case-by-case thing. Maybe we have a lot of good ideas if it comes to ecological problems, to say the idea that nature is not only as science describes it, has been articulated in many religions, and there's some truth in it. And we can use it combined with other interpretations of the world. So if we want to have a rational debate, and I think it's very, very important to get it, because societies which fail here start to be fanatized, and sometimes they don't argue anymore, but they start fighting, because it's so identity relevant being in one of these parties, right? They fanatize. The first is, if you use religious arguments or critique of them, identify what you want to say. You who is using the argument has to make the first clarifying step. And then, if you criticize religion, tell how strong the critique is. If you say it's nonsense, or you shouldn't make too strong a point of it. Some people might think otherwise, yes? Or you can do it in your way, but not in mine. It's not an option for me, but maybe for you. These all different levels. Make it very, very clear. And don't make it a general, abstract, philosophical debate. This is happening in the States. People are writing books without ever entering in the real day debates where we decide and discuss things. Go on the level of the tokens. Ask people in biopolitics and bioethics in your neighborhood if you have a conflict on that level, and try to balance and deal with the issue. Not on an abstract level of all arguments of this kind are worse than arguments of that kind. Because if you have that in mind, you don't listen anymore. And this is the danger. Not listening to the one who has another opinion is killing pluralism and democracy. And this shouldn't happen. And which arguments to ban and which not is not a philosophical decision. It's a political decision. I can give you distinctions and to help you with tools to clear your mind, but which ones we want to see on the place and which we don't want to see there anymore, it's up to us. And if you really think that some arguments, for example, that people holding different sexual orientation or having a different color of skin aren't worth to be here, shouldn't be here in the parliament anymore or in the world, fight for it. It's not a philosophical affair. Thank you.
So Quantum for this very deep and precise presentation of such a complex issue, and now we have a chance to ask him some questions or even debate him. So yeah, let's use this, absolutely criticize, yes, because it was about critique. So let's use this opportunity. Yeah, please.
Okay. Dr. Quantum, you asked many questions actually in your lecture, so I will ask two other questions, which may be my translation of your questions, just in a way. One question is, I mean, it's one thing to speak in normative sense, that, for instance, our state should be secular, so it's normative statement. But what should be, Zolen, but I will ask what can be. So my question is, can there be a secular state?
Okay.
Especially if the premise is that people within the state, many of them, either are religious in the sense of being part of the organized religious communities, or feeling themselves or having identity which is linked to some religious, tradition, maybe even if they don't go to church very often. So, your country, Germany, is it secular state or not? I mean, your party in power is called Christian, Democratic or Socialist, is going to win elections again, I guess. And you subsidize your churches from your budget, right? Two main, Catholic, and they get money from the budget, and so on. I mean, I don't need to. And is it secular? Is it neutral? It does not look neutral. So how secular a liberal state can be? And second, if I may, I think it's all, we have normative statements, this liberal world, that we should base our judgment on rational debate, right? Rational conversation, and rationality of conversation is very important. But again, the question about can our conversation be fully rational? Because the rationality is about drawing some consequences from some premises, but are those premises really rational? Maybe they are really religious or something. Yeah. Okay.
We touched nearly every slide. In this excellence cluster, religion and politics, we do have sociologists making empirical research, trying to find out whether we have, in a descriptive sense, a secular society or not. Okay? One problem is, if I'm right, that it's not clear what they are after when measuring secular or religious. So we have to make interdisciplinary research how to measure the secularity or the religiousness of a society. If you count visiting churches, being member of a church, and say if it's more than 50% who are not going to church or are not members of a church, Germany in this term is a secular thing, state or society. And I wasn't opening the debate whether the state as an instrumental political structure can be secular when the society is not. This is what you framed. This is a different, it didn't make that distinction because then you get some more problems. That's true. I think that in this very broad sense of religious, in the sense of existential commitments, which we don't think we can change, and we don't want to change, nearly all persons are, in this basic sense, religious, in a very broad sense. And my answer was, there is no general answer. I don't believe, I'm not a liberal. I fight for autonomy, individual autonomy. I'm not a liberal in the political philosophy sense. Because I don't think that political liberalism describes correctly what's going on there. So the descriptive part is different if you use a wide or a narrow notion of what it means to be religious. And put in every biography, I would say most people in our German society wouldn't count them as very religious. They would say I'm a member of a church and even I've married, but I'm not very religious. It's a very unclear empirical question. If it comes to the question of which kind of society I myself would defend normatively, I'm defending strict distinction between church and state. I think Germany is a problem because Germany hasn't gone all the way. It stopped somewhere in the middle, and this causes a lot of problems in every kind of institutions, right? And I would say better to make religion a private affair, organizing privately, and leave the state as an institutional thing out of it. This is a fierce debate there. But this I would defend. And I believe, as a philosopher, that religious attitudes are neither rational nor irrational. They are irrational. They are deep, non-cognitivist, practical stances towards the world. Right? And if it's the case, it is a private, practical way of organizing your life and or your social surrounding, how to deal with it. It's neither a case for making theory of it, nor for giving intersubjectively strong rational arguments for it. It's more a feeling of being than a theory of being in the world. That's my position. I would like to defend in the next years. If the excellence cluster in Münster gets the next 7 years, I will work out a non-cognitivist conception of religious attitudes. And then something would follow there. In terms of rationality, you have reduced, to make a point against what I said, rationality reduced to logical argumentation. I think the notion of rationality has to be broadened a little bit. Right? There's practical rationality which cannot be reduced to logical formalism. Even Aristotle knew that there is more to being rational than to logical things. But it's a complicated issue. If it comes to ethical debate in political sphere, not in the classroom, there is much more going on in dealing with each other than you can put in a book of logics. It's more like rhetorical aspects which are very important for dealing with ourselves in a pluralistic society. For example, if you discuss with religious person or non-religious person or ethical persons who have different opinions than you, the way you discuss with them, the way you treat their position, and the way you present your position, it is an important message, whether you are interested in finding compromises, finding livable solutions, or whether you think it's a kind of classroom situation, sorting things out. I think, and I've seen that, although I'm not a religious person myself in the narrow sense, that a scientist comes dealing with green gene technology in plants, dealing with our normal farmers, and saying, to think that the plant is something in which an immanent meaning is placed, which is hurt by using gene techniques, is pre-rational romantics. This is war-making argument. These farmers understand what they do on a day-to-day basis by being part of natural processes. They don't reduce them to scientifically producible results. And if you want to enlighten these practices, you have to start differently than to say it's all irrational. This is what I would say. And I'm not very optimistic that there is a clear-cut distinction between rationality and non-rationality. Human beings are such that they are weeping and oscillating, and this is why I think if this is the human condition, this existential commitment that it's going to your heart, and that it's more or less rational, and that you can more or less tolerant and relaxed, I think these strategies, there are gradual distinctions, not to sharpen the oppositions, but to find common ground, make the problem smaller by looking what is the problem. It is one thing to ask whether the person is allowed to wear religious symbols in a public school. It's a very local question. Then to make a general philosophical paper on should religious symbols be banned from all schools. I would say in this abstract way, it will cause conflict where it is not necessary to cause it. Don't go to the general law form, but go to the contextual compromises which allow learning to live with these things. This is the answer in the end. And for the descriptive part, I'll send you Detlef Pollard, our sociologist. He can give you at least a good answer to the German.
I have met him, yes.
You met him already?
Okay.
Okay, yeah. What did he say? Is German secular?
Yeah, quite.
Okay, so other questions?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you and our university for giving us the opportunity to talk to you and listen to this kind of lecture. And my question, as long as we don't have political debate here, I would like to ask you, what is the right way to teach or not to teach religion at schools? Because I myself have been studying this kind of topics and studying only Christianity, even though I had interest in Buddhism or Islam or something like that. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, wonderful. If you, maybe you know or you will learn in the next years in Münster, we try in the university to establish a faculty for Islamic theology, highly debated for several reasons. And we also want to add what we in Germany call Religionswissenschaften. This means religious sciences. They are not theologically, confessionally bound. It's more like an empirical social science. If I were in the position to define how in school these issues are taught, I would have religious science and not theology, no confessional bound in public schools for a lot of reasons. Right? This is what I would say. And even in the university, my main position is if you are training young persons who go to school as teachers, they should study Religionswissenschaften and comparative studies, and in some courses the specific dogmatic doctrines of different religions. Nothing more. If you are studying to become a priest, it's different. The church should be in charge there, and there are limits to the secular university to deal with that issue. This is a complicated problem there, because if you do science there, they cannot do everything they want as a kind of religious or theological doctrine, but you cannot reduce it to a secular science. In schools, I think we should restrict to comparing religious systems, learning how they work internally without having a kind of stance that I'm confessed in one of it. And this is the situation in Germany. If you are going to school as a religious teacher, the church has to allow it, and they can ban you if you are doing the wrong things. And the wrong thing is not to give a wrong interpretation of the Old Testament, but do wrong things in your daily life as a private person. This is what happens. And I think this is totally beyond what we have in a liberal society, we should have in a liberal society. So I would fight for that. But it would be a long way, and I would never be elected as a minister for dealing with school affairs in Germany. But philosophically, yes, if you want to really distinguish state and religion as privately organized, and you have public school system, it cannot be part of it, except in the sense of you report that there is something like this. Then you have to report all the religious orientations, but not introduce young human beings via school into one of these life forms. That's my position.
So, how would you explain the phenomenon of Macarius III, the first president of independent Cyprus, a person who was democratically elected as a president, and at the same time he was the head of the church? How do you think, was it a spiritual readiness of society, or it was just a political wish to have such a leader who can maintain the church and stay together? And can it theoretically happen nowadays? Thank you.
Well, the last answer I can give an easy one. Theoretically, it can happen because it's not logically inconsistent, right? And if I look in some areas of the world, and the misinformation and non-information of persons who are allowed to elect representatives, and the need a lot of persons do have to have a stable orientation in their life when all is destroyed in their real life, I can imagine a lot of scenarios where people have all their hope in electing persons who stand for a clear normative order in the world. This can be a religious one or a different one. But they want orientation, and they don't want individual freedom. They want safety first, in some sense. And so it can happen, yes. On the level of a person, it can be that you are a religious person, even a theological person, trained theology professional, but if you enter the political scene, you can make a distinction. It can happen. And some of these are so integer that they really can distinguish. There's a small example in the highest court in the United States. The presidents, if they have the chance to put a new person in there, put a person who they think have the same basic opinion they do hold themselves. Mostly it's a question of abortion, yes or no, right? And the conservative presidents in the last centuries always put judges there which were very conservative when they were as a political and public person, but they never did anything as a judge in that court, because they say my role now is a different one. And if a person is able to distinguish its political role from its religious attitude and its theological training, there is no problem. But there is a danger there, right? And if you look in some other countries where you have to be a trained theological professional from one campaign to become a politician, you see what the cost is. At least from my view, who wants to have a pluralistic society in which individual life plans can be lived, because they get another view of what a good life is. And this is something I learned from my first professorship in Duisburg-Essen. The University of Essen is part of the Ruhrgebiet. And in the Ruhrgebiet, you have more than 50% of young people having a migration background. I always said when I was there, the German language was the first foreign language in my university, right? Because all the people had other differences. And I had to give the lectures on political philosophy. And maybe 20% of the members there were anti-democrats. They really had arguments to say democracy is the wrong way of living. It's pseudo-freedom, it's market, it's trivialities making important, and the really holy things in life all are destroyed and lost. And the other there, who grew up as Democrats, never thought about why it's normatively contested and something to be argued for, right? They were shocked. And so I know that and I have cooperation with China. And there people say, well-being is important, not individual freedom. Individual freedom is for a minority here. The 2 billion people we have, they need water, a good living. Now they say we need fresh air, so capitalism and production is a problem. But they are not interested in autonomy. They are interested in well-being, because they say people who have a well-being don't attack the party, right? So I don't think that our orientation towards individual autonomy, etc., is automatically seen as the best way of living. And if I'm right in what I think philosophically, we cannot think that we do have the best arguments. We have to test it, and we have to fight for it, and we have to engage for it. So practically, I wouldn't elect someone who wants to say he knows how we all should live, and he wants to describe the way I have to live. I would shy away from that. But I can understand conditions where people are so desperate that they hope that things improve if this guy rules the country. Yeah.
Please, yes.
Okay. Thank you so much once again. And you've brought up a very interesting topic about people coming back to the church. And you mentioned that even the people who consider that they don't have any type of religious beliefs do go there for some engaging ceremonies or illness and whatever. I'm curious, what does make you feel and think that this is not just simply the move they do in order to fit in the society frame, and makes you feel that this is just the move that they have any type of beliefs deep down in their hearts?
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so, well, conformity can be an argument. That to say, I do that because my family, my social surrounding expects it. In a lot of areas in Germany, I don't think the social pressure is so high that it can explain that. Maybe it explains it if it comes to marriage, because you are the younger one and the family has the money, the power, and all the rest. If you are 75 and you have a severe illness, and it's probably that you will die in 2 years, and you start engaging with your church and your priest to discuss things, there's no social pressure of that kind anymore, right? It's a different, so we have to sort out the issues there. If you baptize your children, train them in a religious belief before they are autonomous to decide yourself, you can think about it. Some do that because they think it's a normal way, some think it is a good way because they should learn a religious orientation from within and later get the freedom. There are a lot of arguments, pro and cons, and I don't want to say that one decision is the right one. The point why your question is so interesting is I have made a distinction between the religious and the theological, because I was interested only in beliefs. We have to distinguish 3 things: religion, theology, church. The institutional thing, right, in which we organize our religious attitudes, has another social aspect and can be analyzed in social philosophy, which cannot be reduced to that. Being part of a community can be an intrinsic value even if you don't share all the values in this community are relevant, because you have a home there. You don't love all your family members normally, but you are at home there. right? And sometimes if people are in a situation when they are lonely, when the life is going bad, they go to the places where they feel at home. And this is not a rational thing, but an anthropological thing. Or there are offers to share time with others. And the churches as institutions are so good and so well trained to offer people this social services more than philosophers, right? But Habermas once said, if we really want to replace religious attitudes by philosophical moral attitudes, we have to offer all these things the churches offer when someone dies. If we can't do that, it won't go away. Not for rational reasons, but for very human reasons. It simply is a fact. And I think in my theory I could even analyze that, because these basic religious or existential commitments are so deep that very often you don't even notice them. But in situations of crisis, you are reduced to the basics. And you are confronted. You are not interested in the new car anymore because your life is threatened. Right? You have so many important problems. Your handy is broken down. The next exam is, if there is an earthquake or a civil war, they aren't relevant anymore. And I think if it comes to the existentially relevant things, the churches offer something, and most of us are trained that this is the field in which we deal with these issues. The physician is another one playing that role, right? And why, you know what we say about the physician? It's a god dressed in white. So these authorities, right?
Well, thank you very much. I think it was more than we expected. It was really a great presentation, a great debate, and I'm very pleased to announce that according to the decision of the Academic Council, we are awarding the honorary doctorate to Professor Quantem. So now we'll conduct a small ceremony. Just a moment, yes. I think
what I have to do?
You have to just.
You don't dare in Germany, so I hope it's correct.
Yeah, there is no correct way. It's the way we are very pluralist.
I make the left way.
So this is the diploma.
Thank you very much.